And I've been talking recently with a colleague of mine. I belong to the North American Association of Christians in Social Work, and I've been talking to a colleague of mine, Heath Waters. And Heath, interestingly, when he talks about this topic, likes to situate it within Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. And I'm sure everybody here did Psych 101 at some stage, and you learned, I think there are 8 of them. And I can get trust versus mistrust, and then I forget the rest of them. So for those of you who are still struggling with Psych 101 like myself, the 5th stage, the adolescent stage, is where the adolescent is trying to find an identity. And what Erikson is saying is that the adolescent or the young adult is trying to find a fit between who they are inside of themselves, who they experience themselves to be, and their place in the world. Integrating one's sexuality with one's religious identity. I wouldn't like to tell you how old I am, but I'll tell you, it's still a project. I certainly wasn't raised on well integrating my sexuality with my religion. I think you were supposed to keep them in 2 separate boxes and never the twain shall meet. I think things have improved a bit. I think John Paul II's theology of the body is beginning to reach into some of those areas. But I think it's an area where we don't deal with very well. And in the boarding school I went to, we had confession last thing on Saturday night so that Sunday morning you were good for communion. We kept them in 2 boxes. And that's the classic thing that people who are gay or lesbian will possibly do. I'll have my gay identity Monday to Saturday, and Sunday I'll put on a Catholic identity. And I compartmentalize. I put my life into boxes. And this happens if people have a high commitment to their sexual identity and a high commitment to their religious identity. It also happens, I think you can do it when you're younger. I think it becomes very burdensome when you're older, because you have to make sure that the 2 never touch or bleed into each other. God forbid that you be seen on a truck on Gay Pride Parade by your parish priest. You would have some explaining to do here. So you have to compartmentalize your life very strictly, and that leads to a lot of isolation and a lot of disintegration. And guys in my trade are all into having people integrating the various parts of your life into some kind of a whole that sort of hangs together in some way. The alternative to compartmentalization often is to decide to split and to decide in favor of one rather than the other. You collapse the choice and you decide, I'll either be gay and I'll turf out my religious identity, or I'll turf out my sexual identity and I'll be a devout Catholic. And I think those are very risky choices. I think to plump for your sexual orientation and to throw away your faith heritage will deprive you of something that, certainly for me at least, has been an enormous source of hope and help and consolation in difficult times in my life. I think you lose something profound. I think it's very dangerous to squash your sexual orientation in favor of your faith orientation. I think people who repress their sexuality do so at great personal cost. I think it's bad, often bad things happen. It's a very, very risky path to take. The path that I would try and advocate with the young people I meet is to try and create some sort of meta-identity whereby we can hold both our faith identity and our sexual identity. And James Fowler sets the stage for that. He's the guy who talks about stages of faith. And he talks that in the teenage, young adult years, we should enter into some sort of an individuative, reflective faith. It's individuative in the sense that you take ownership from it. You just don't go along because everybody else is going along. You just don't go to church because your mom is going to church or your dad is going to church, and you really get into too much trouble. So it's individuative insofar as you're taking now some ownership about who you are. And secondly, it's reflective. It's based on a thoughtful, prayerful reflection about where you are. and about what you're going to believe and what you're going to hold as vital. And it's interesting that that meta-identity of holding one's faith and one's sexual orientation works only when we do some profound form of having an individual of reflective faith that is mature, that is adult. And that journey, in my understanding, is a long process that takes time.
So I think while the teaching is very strict, and there is no getting away from that. I mean, I don't think there is any getting away from that. I think there is a lot of I don't want to say leeway because that sounds as if it's an escape hatch, but I think if you can think of Catholic teaching as being on these objective and subjective poles, you might agree that there's more to discuss there then, because of this emphasis on conscience and because of this emphasis on being true to who we are as human beings, and then how we will actually shape and act out our sexual lives. I think the tone of Catholic teaching over the years has really changed in many ways. But again, you can almost divide the documents if you did have the time to read them, and I advise you to read them because they're, again, whether you want to disagree with them or agree with them, I think they're a useful source of knowledge, and they're pretty interesting in terms of what they say from the point of view of human nature. Of course, as a moral theologian, I'm biased. I mean, I read these kind of things on a sort of daily basis. So it seems perfectly normal to me. Why does everybody else not do this? But some of them are pretty long, that I understand. But there are some of the documents that do then come out on that objective side, if you like, where they will actually say, like the Catechism, for example, which is a derivative document, and which does say about homosexual acts not being allowed. But in the very next clause, we'll talk about how we are to maintain respect for homosexual people, that in terms of dignity and worth, etc., we are all on the same basis. When you go back to this idea of, again, theological, of all of us being made in God's image, then it's really important for the Church to stress that no matter what our sexual orientation, or in fact any other facet of our personality, because we're not reduced just to our sexual orientation, important though that is, that really we are talking about a church that stresses equality and dignity. And I think it really shows in a couple of the documents in particular. But one of them really was called Always Our Children. It was a document put out by the American bishops. And again, it's addressed to parents. Denis was saying that, you know, you deal with the people will say, it's my parents who need to talk. And this particular document, this letter, was really addressed to parents when kids come and tell them about their sexual orientation. And it's very, very clear about how heterosexual people, and not just parents, you know, should, if you like, react. I think it's fair to say that many heterosexual people, when they hear that their kids are gay, do not react well. It just seems to be almost par for the course. It's a fact of life, if you like. But so many, of course, get over that, and you know, this is still the same person in front of them, the child they've loved from, you know, minute one, and that's what really takes back over again. And the Church really says that. Do not reject people. Again, it's that idea of we're still supposed to be as inclusive as it's possible for us to be. Always remember that these children are God's gift. God's gift to the parents, God's gift to the community, and God's gift to the whole world. It also says that the parents should go for professional help if they find it difficult to deal with this kind of thing. So very, very positive. But there's a couple of phrases that I think, that I'll finish with, that I think really they stood out for me the first time I read it, and they continue to stand out for me. And I think that this really underscores what Catholic teaching is all about. I am agreeing there is a strictness to it, but it's not a strictness that's without concern. It's a strictness in many ways, as they see it anyway, as born out of love. And on page 5 of this document, which you can get on the American Bishop's website, by the way, is all in all, it is essential to recall one basic truth. God loves every person as a unique individual. And it goes on to say, God does not love someone any less simply because he or she is homosexual, God's love is always and everywhere offered to those who are open to receiving it. And I think that really sums up, crystallizes church teaching, and in fact, the way all of us should be dealing with this topic. Thanks.